Lisa. Thank you for that introduction, and also to President Ray. Greetings to my friends and colleagues and students and alums, staff members. Hope you're having a good day. And let me just jump in. For our reflection today, I'd like to follow a pattern of some of our previous speakers and focus on a word, or in my case, 3 words. We've reflected on lament and suffering and resilience and humiliation and breath and hope and framing, among others. Today, I want to talk briefly about contagion, quarantine, and to keep up my poor attempt at alliteration, consequences. These 3 words came to me as I thought about, and this is a time of sitting and thinking too much about things, is it not? Thinking about the pandemic as a gay man. And yes, I acknowledge that I speak unavoidably as one who has white privilege, cisgender privilege, as well as a job and a paycheck and can work at home. I want to keep focused, so I will stick to my script. I also want to speak personally. Other queer folk and even other gay men would surely go about this differently. My reflections are prompted by discussions with friends about this time of isolation, and especially that framing that I often hear, perhaps you do too, that no one alive has been through anything like this before. I arrived to the big city, New York, as a 21-year-old seminary student in 1987. The year ACT UP was founded, the year President Reagan finally spoke the acronym HIV. I had a wedding, a different sex wedding, on January 2nd, 1988. I eventually came out of my closet 10 years later, quite late by today's standards. I can't help thinking that probably would not have survived a coming out and its requisite sexual explorations if I was out then. My marriage turned into a different sort of death-dealing arrangement eventually, but it probably preserved me in those first few years. In any case, still closeted or whatever state I may have been in, I tried to be a good ally at least. I didn't join ACT UP, but I did participate in the anti-mask protests across the street from the Roman Catholic Cathedral and had a field ed experience at God's Love We Deliver, and in other small ways did advocacy at and beyond Union. We lost at least 4 members of the seminary community while I was in residence. I say their names: John, Kevin, Bob, Alan, Presente. HIV/AIDS is a pandemic and has taken 30 million lives across these years and across the globe. In 1987, it still seemed like the gay cancer that it was first labeled. No one knew why all these healthy young men were falling ill. The diagnosis was simply a death sentence for a long time, whereas, however horrifying, the fatality rate of COVID-19 is just 3% of those infected. While affecting, again at the time, a despised minority group, it devastated that gay subculture, taking entire social groups, which often were a gay man's only family, leaving the survivors alone, scared, grieving, traumatized. In other words, there are people living today who have been through this before. And so my first word, and I hope a little bit of gay pandemic wisdom: contagion. One aspect of the pandemic that gay men understand in our bones is both fearing and embodying contagion. Most of us gathered here this afternoon fear getting infected, that someone else will leave a residue of aerosols in a space we may occupy, and we will contract this virus and suffer, perhaps even to death. Most of us also fear infecting others. One of the scariest aspects of COVID-19 is, of course, that the asymptomatic can still be carriers, perhaps getting sick themselves, but sometimes remaining healthy while making others sick. My youngest niece, at the end of a long road trip this summer, arrived at my mom's lake house in time to celebrate my mom's 79th birthday. I teased my brother, "Tell Brina not to give grandma a deadly virus as a present," I said. Silence. Such is my cynical side and my sick sense of humor. In any case, to return to the contagion of gayness, let's alight for a moment on US Christian homophobia, or better, erotophobia. I'll leave the homophobia of other religious traditions to others to discuss later as there is interest. Christianity has always struggled with what to do about desires of all sorts, but especially sexual desires. Some say Augustine's biggest innovation was to shift sexual anxieties from outward acts, behaviors that could be forgiven and abandoned, to inward desires. One's entire disposition could be misdirected. In any case, and here I'm drawing on Mark Jordan's playfully serious study of Christian rhetoric about homosexuality in the US from approximately 1950 to 2000, Recruiting Young Love. The cover is worth seeing. It's kind of creepy. He begins, before his own announced beginning date, of course, to discuss the confluence of discourses around the perceived need to claim a solid sexual identity, the possibility of this because of the solidification of categories of homosexual and heterosexual in that order, and among others, and the growth of human development theories in which adolescence was seen as the age when all this was supposed to happen at the turn of the 20th century. He writes, "The most effective American rhetoric for condemning civil or religious toleration of homosexuality has repeatedly warned of dangers to the young. But admitting the vulnerability of adolescence implies that happily heterosexual adults are made, not born. Every adolescent must be recruited for one sexual side or the other, for God's procreative plan or the devil's murmured perversions. Every adolescent promises a productive future of sexual conformity while threatening a rebellious future of sterile dissent." So both sides are recruiting, but one is saving young people while the other side pollutes with deadly passions. Supposedly sterile rather than reproductive on our own, we are imagined as predatory. It is the sense that we do not just carry a virus, but are a virus that is so damaging, and an excuse for discrimination and violence as well. In some, gay men and other queers are blamed for all kinds of things: earthquakes, floods, hurricanes, recessions. We're even blamed for inciting violence against ourselves, as illustrated in the gay panic defense. We also, of course, were blamed and neglected and left to die when HIV and AIDS ravaged. And all of these things are ever shifting and unstable and both deadly and perhaps promising at the same time. I don't like being seen as a carrier of disease, but I do like to be seen as a disruptor. I borrow Harry Milk's famous greeting. I'm sorry, Harvey. I knew that was wrong. "I'm Harvey Milk, and I'm here to recruit you." This leads to our second word, quarantine. The fear of contagion leads to the desire for self-protection, and at least for those of us who actually want to take the advice from public health experts who outline measures that have proven effective, to quarantine. This is something queer folks know quite a bit about, as those who claim non-normative sexualities in a patriarchal heteronormative society have meant that most of us, for some period of time, have cringed in a closet. The most well-known descriptor of the closet and its deep influences on Western thought, literature, and self-understanding is the self-described, and this is her description, fat, perverted Jewish feminist scholar, Eve Kosofsky-Sedgwick. Her major work is titled, appropriately enough, The Epistemology of the Closet, and I have it here. She writes, "The gay closet is not a feature only of the lives of gay people, but for many gay people, it is still the fundamental feature of social life. And there can be a few gay people, however courageous and forthright by habit, however fortunate in support of their immediate communities, in whose lives the closet is still not a shaping presence. There are risks in making salient the continuity and centrality of the closet in a historical narrative that does not have as a fulcrum a saving vision, whether located in the past or the future of its apocalyptic rupture. A meditation that lacks the particular utopian organization will risk glamorizing the closet itself, if only by default. Will risk presenting as inevitable or somehow valuable its exactions, its deformations, its disempowering and sheer pain. Yet it has been also inexhaustibly and gorgeously productive for later gay thinkers, and on a far vaster scale and with less honorific inflection, inexhaustibly productive of modern Western culture and history at large, end quote. The central point is implicit here that the closet is ambiguous. It is both a sanctuary and a coffin. It protects, allowing us, like our current distancing measures, a means of self-preservation. It also, as with our current sheltering, comes at a cost: isolation, disruption of relationships, suffocation. While gay men and many others know well the contours of our closets, quarantine can also trigger old traumas, and at least in my case, make despair a constant potential companion. We literally can't stay in here forever and live, but we also can never escape the closet. We must instead manage risk. And so to our third and final word: consequences. Both staying in our closets and leaving them involve risk. This is a time of risk management. Nothing we do is without risk, and this queer folk know well. But let me pause to share a couple of paragraphs from the Sunday New York Times this past Sunday on parenting in the time of COVID, especially as the school year approaches. I think it put this conundrum pretty well. The author's name is Kim Brooks. There is a difference, of course, between being safe and feeling safe. Actual safety is a fantasy. We can take every precaution and still sometimes find ourselves in the wrong place at the wrong time. When we talk about being safe, what we really mean is taking reasonable precautions. Deciding what's reasonable is where values and interests often clash, where political polarization and moral judgment can make sane conversation impossible. Feeling safe is another matter. It has little to do with risk assessment. We feel safe when we belong to a community, a group of people invested in our well-being and the well-being of our children. In America, this feeling of safety has been hard to come by, but maybe never so much as today. One thing that made me smile recently, it actually had me rolling on the floor laughing in delight, is a document from the New York City Office of Public Health that offers sex during COVID guidance. Yes, I am that weird. I claim this bulletin as a gay man because the owner of a gay and BDSM gear company, Fort Trough, proposed the idea to the city and actually wrote most of it. I think Roxy is going to be able to share it with us. I hope you will be a bit scandalized, but not overly so. I do think it serves as a model for all kinds of discussions we are having about community gatherings, actually, about worship and community and church and that sort of thing. But back to the document and sex. What if we talked about such kind of things in our religious communities? Let me highlight a few things. And I'll read the preamble and then just look at the headlines. All New Yorkers should stay home as much as possible and minimize contact with others to reduce the spread of COVID-19. Sex is a normal part of life and should always be with the consent of all parties. This document offers strategies to reduce the risk of spreading COVID-19 during sex. Decisions about sex and sexuality need to be balanced with personal and public health. During this extended public health emergency, people will and should have sex. Consider using harm reduction strategies to reduce the risk to yourself, your partners, and your community. Can you have sex? Yes. Number one, know how the virus spreads. Number two, have sex only with people close to you. You are your safest sex partner, masturbation. The next safest partner is someone you live with. Have sex only with consenting partners. Limit contact, including sex, with anyone outside your household. If two is company, then three or more is definitely a crowd. It's on the next page. If you usually meet your sex partners online or make a living by having sex, consider taking a break from in-person dates. If you decide to have sex outside of your circle of contacts or a hookup, monitor yourself for symptoms. Having antibodies against the virus does not mean definite immunity. Take care during sex. Kissing can easily pass the virus. I won't go into the other ones. Make it kinky, masturbate together, wash after. Skip sex if you or your partner are not feeling well. And then finally, prevent other sexually transmitted STIs and unintended pregnancy. I hope you'll study it more. I think it's worth a bit of our attention. But let me highlight a few things about it. It seems to me refreshingly frank without being salacious, although our tastes might differ. It seems human. People are going to have sex. Let's help them know their risk and make the best possible decisions. It acknowledges how each of us have our own measure of risk tolerance, and these should be discussed. What feels safe to one person feels risky to another, and etc., and vice versa. It is grounded in hard-won knowledge. The survivors of the gay plague offer it to the wider community as a gift. And that has been my purpose today as well. May it be so. Thanks.